evening, and welcome back to my Astro Imaging Journey channel. We're going to go over the settings to get the autofocuser working, and we could go into the Equipment Profile Manager, but I do have the sequence loaded up here. Let's show that. Show sequencer. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually show the control panel, because that is what is the active settings for the sequence. And then let's go over to our focus tab. As you can see, the steps is 10 and the for fine and 100 for coarse. That is over here on the left hand side. If I change any of that, say 200, that changes over here. So it's an instantaneous change. But I like to leave it the 10 and 100, which I believe are the defaults. Seems to work pretty well. And exposure of 6 seconds, ISO 1600, that's been working pretty well. 5 was a little, excuse me, little underexposed. So 6 seemed to be a good sweet spot. Not too long, since it does have to take multiple frames, and we waste time. You're just looking for the brightest stars, and you don't want to overexpose and bloat out those stars either. I can throw out the calculations. Everything else I leave unchecked, except for the autofocus setting here. And let's go into a set. And which metric are we going to use? Half full, full width, half max, requires pinpoint, which I do not have working. So we got to go with half flex radius. Let's go through our options here. Autofocus every one frame. I mean, I guess if you're doing 20 or 30 minute subs, you might want to do that. But, you know, I'm not doing those yet, so that's not an option for me. Autofocus every 1 degree of change. I did test that a little bit. Going to 2 degrees, things started to drift, so 1 degree worked pretty well. Autofocus every 60 minutes. I have both of those checked. If you looked in my first use video, or if you had watched that rather, you would have seen me show that, you know, when it hits either of these, it's going to autofocus, and then both of the counters reset, and it starts new. So if it changes by 1 degree, then it's going to wait 1 more hour or 1 more degree, and then it'll autofocus and reset both of them again. I was a little worried that we would see maybe a 1 degree change at the 45-minute mark, and then the next thing you know, 15 minutes later, it's going to autofocus again, because I thought they were independent, but they're not, so that's a good thing. And I do the 60 minutes for my own sanity's sake. It is an SCT, even though it does have the locking knobs for the primary mirror. You never know if you're going to get mirror slip or anything of that nature, so that's just for my own personal peace of mind. Autofocus on filter change. I don't have filters. I'm not, you know, I'm a one-shot color, i.e. a DSLR, so no focus wheel, so we're not doing that. Autofocus before sequence starts. You know, I don't know if this is really needed or not, but I got it checked just in case. You know, it's one of those things that it just has to you know, I felt more comfortable check marking it. I don't know if it's actually doing anything. Autofocus on resume. You know, if we lose guiding for any reason, let's say clouds pass by, I really should have that check marked, but I don't, simply because every night's been pretty decent that I've used it. So I'm going to see how things go with that. I think I left that off because if we do have something like clouds or whatever, and we're just trying to sneak in frames, we don't want to waste time with focusing. Because with these two settings up here, it should be pretty well in focus. So if we can get data, we can get data. And autofocus after automatic centering action, so that's the frame in focus when it's time for a target, and also on a meridian flip. So that is key. Meridian flips are where an SCP is going to get your, you know, when that mirror is going to drop or whatever, or move, that's when it's going to probably happen. Over here in our options, again, I'm not using a filter wheel, so this button here is not needed. OSC one-shot color, which is what the DSLR is, 6 seconds, ISO 1600. The sweet spot for my DSLR, according to the data, is around 930, 940 ISO. Clearly that's not an option. So I really should be using 800, but with my testing, the 1600, you know, it's good enough. I get a little bit more amplification out of it, but not too much amplification of the noise. So I really should be using 800, but 1600 is doable at this point. If I do longer exposures, say of nebula, and I'm going past 5 minutes, and I want to try, you know, 10 or 20 minutes, I will definitely have to drop that down to 800. Autofocus data points and step size. So in the first use video, I talked about this briefly. So this is the number of iterations it's going to attempt to autofocus. So you want an odd number for here. And then your step size is how many steps is it going to move on each one of these points. So what happens is when an autofocus sequence gets initiated, it's going to go half minus 1. So in this case, minus 1 is an 8, half of that is 4. 4 times 45, or 180 steps, is what it's going to move out. And then each data point after that, it's going to move in 45 steps until it does the 9th one. And then in the graph, if you was watching the first use video, you'll see hopefully a nice V curve, and it'll be able to calculate where the bottom of that V should be, and what step number it needs to be, and the expected value for the half flux radius. You know, that takes a little bit to figure out. Basically, if we go, you know, you have to step it out until you're roughly 2 or 3 times the half flux radius. That's doable for refractors and shorter focal lengths. For the SCTs, you know, trying to get a double HFR is not really doable. So close to double was close enough. You know, if when I use the bar batten off mask and I took a test exposure and the HFR was 5.5, then if I'm getting 9.5 and above, then I know I'm out of focus. So that's where I dialed in to get to this. So once you have that number of steps out that you've gone to get to that point, you double that. So in my particular case, I moved out 180 steps. So I'm going to double that, and it's going to be 360. And then we divide that by these total number of data points minus 1. So 860 divided by 8, and we come up with 45. But let's open up a calculator just to make sure my calculation is in fact right. So 360 divided by 8 equals 45. And apologies for Duke over there. He's 15 years old and he's got an old man hack going on right now. So this autofocus dialog auto close delay. So when it does autofocus, that window comes up, and once it completes, it will stay for 10 seconds. Minimum star diameter at a 1x1 binning. You know, we're not binning, we're a DSLR, so we can't really bin. So, you know, we're in pretty close to, you know, with the Edge. It's a 1960mm focal length, so we need to go a little bit higher. You know, 5 seems to be a decent sweet spot. You go any lower, you know, you can't really do a 1 pixel because, you know, it's going to try to lock in on noise. 2 or 3, kind of the same thing. Could I go to 4? Maybe. 5 seems to be pretty decent. So I'm leaving it there. You know, if I had a refractor and say a 920mm focal length, you know, if I went above a 5 and say to a 7 or 8, you know, my stars just might not be big enough and it wouldn't be finding any. So we'll have, you know, that's a setting you're going to have to play with for your setup and to figure out what's going to get the most stars for it to calculate without pulling in any noise. And disable smart focus. Check this if you want to disable smart focus behavior. Automatic continuation and expansion of the focal range in order to try to get any adequate data. If your scope has a central obstruction, you should most likely disable smart focus. Okay, now I remember that last line. If your scope has a central obstruction, you should most likely disable smart focus. So I disabled it. Why? Because we have I have the Edge, which is an SCT, so you have the secondary mirror in the middle. So it is a quote-unquote central obstruction, as I understand the terminology. So I checkmarked that, disable it. Autofocus with filter, obviously I don't have a focus wheel, so that's unchecked. Crop autofocus frames by 20%. You know, if you don't have a field flattener, you might want to do that so that the stars in the corners, they might get a little elongated. That's going to throw off the HFR value that it calculates for those, which is going to throw off everything if it includes them. So that would be key if you don't have a field flattener. My Edge has a field flattener built into the OTA, so I don't need to crop. Apply dark subtraction. Why do I keep saying an S in subtraction as subtraction? I don't know. I don't have a dark library for this, so yep, I'm not using it. I mean, I guess that could be, I mean, I'd have to take some darks and at around the 6-second time frame, and you know, is it needed though? I really don't know. I might play with that in later, but for now, just to get this working, it was working pretty well, so I'm gonna leave that unchecked for now. And then save autofocus packages to and a directory. This is in case you're having issues with autofocus for some reason, and you want to send this to send some data to the SGP programmers to figure that out. So we leave that unchecked because I don't want to clutter up my hard drive. And we'll go to OK. And then, you know, that is pretty much it for the focuser settings. I mean, the only other one, excuse me, is if I was connected and we went into the settings, you would have a max value right here, somewhere in here. You know, it defaults to 10,000. You're going to have to figure out what it is for your setup. You know, I went all the way in with mine so that the reading over here where it says current position read a 0, and I made sure it didn't go in any further. You know, there is a slip clutch inside this thing, so once it hits the stop, continuing to turn the knob is not going to damage it. And then I use the go to option, and I said go to 10,000 because I was under the impression that the value that appeared here was read off of the controller, which it wasn't. It's a default value. So, you know, once I noticed that it was stopping, I went back to 0 again, did a go to, went to 5,000, noticed a little over 4,000, it stopped. So I set my value to 4,000 to be the max. And so far, during the autofocus sessions, I need some more coffee because I am unable to talk tonight. I apologize. And yes, so during the imaging sessions, I'm getting, you know, plus or minus maybe 100. So, you know, as long as I set the, you know, the current position using the go-to to 2000, which is roughly mid-range, and then batting off mask to get the rough focus, there's plenty of range in that plus or minus 2000 to maintain focus throughout the night. You know, that's definitely not a problem. So, you know, that works out pretty well. Other than that, there's not much on here to go over. So with that, I hope this was helpful for somebody. Hopefully you. And if you did, you know, if it did, hit that like button. If you like what I am doing, hit that subscribe button. And by all means, if you want to get notified when I upload something new, hit that bell. And I'm going to wish you a good rest of your day, clear skies, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you. Goodbye.